this particular case, it's about Canadians serving the IDF. We talked about this back, I think it was in August the last time. There was an article that broke out about two specific Canadians who went to serve the IDF, who went to serve post October 7th. They were complicit of war crimes. They were complicit of the genocide that was going on in Gaza. And then when they tried to return home back to Canada, the Canadian government warned them to say that, hey, you were complicit in war crimes in a foreign country. You were serving a foreign country's agenda. And we are going to prosecute to the full extent on those crimes. And those two individuals went absolutely berserk. They said it was anti-Semitic, that they were being targeted, that this is, hatred against, the IDF and Israel and whatnot. And it just went absolute madness. And it's still continuing, folks. It's still continuing, folks, because there's been more investigative reports of more people, of more Canadians that are serving abroad for a foreign country's army. And I've stated this before, on a state of principle, I am against this. You could choose and decide on your own that, hey, you want to serve a foreign country's army, you want to help them, and you want to, go over there, serve abroad, and help them battle it out, whatever. That is your decision. But on a state of principle, I have stated this. It doesn't matter to me what country you're serving, whether it's an allied nation or not an allied nation, that if you are a Canadian citizen that's willing to put themselves out there for a foreign country and their agenda and their defense ahead of Canadian defense, that is you revoking your citizenship. That is you voluntarily giving up your ability as a Canadian citizen. That, to me, in my eyes, because that involves a lot of different scenarios, that involves a lot of investigating afterwards, that being a conflict of interest because you're a Canadian citizen that's willing to do the dirty work of a foreign country, that involves national security, that involves, treasonous behaviors, what kind of information you're serving to foreign nations on the behest of Canada. Like, there's so many things wrong with that. So, as I stated, you can make the decision all you want. You can go serve the IDF. You can go serve in Ukraine. You can go serve the Chinese military if you want to. But the minute you are granted that, the minute you go ahead with that, that is you revoking your own citizenship. You are no longer part of Canada if you're willing to do that. We already have a Canadian defense. We already have a Canadian army that is desperate for people. Hence why they're trying to bring in more illegal migrants to serve the army. But anyway, it just gets so interesting the more you get exposed to this. So this tweet here in particular, this is from Kitz, who says, this is good news. Dual Israeli-Canadian citizens who served in the IDF are now being investigated by the RCMP for alleged war crimes. More countries need to do this. Leave them nowhere to go. So, if you're taking part of a foreign country's army and taking a part in their agenda, and if their agenda is violating international law, which Israel has repeatedly violated international codes and ethics, they have violated international law. They are held to contempt by the UN. That you are complicit of that. Regardless if you're Canadian or not, regardless of where you come from, if you take part of that, you are part of this. You are complicit of that. You made the ultimate decision to go over there and serve with their military. So whatever their military is doing, and if they're complicit of war crimes, they're complicit of international lawfare, if they're complicit of genocide, then you are complicit of that because you made that ultimate decision. But I disagree with leaving them nowhere to go. I would say, hey, if you're serving the IDF, then obviously you're putting Israel ahead of Canada. So Israel then has to grant you the ability to stay. While you're serving their military, maybe they should give you room and board. Maybe they should be upping the ante to serve you because apparently you're demising Canadians' interest to go for a foreign nation. And again, that's on a principle level. I say that with any country. So here's what, this is from I-24 News. This is what they concluded.
This could go in any number of directions, but to your point, I think you're right on the money that this is part of a broader strategy to signal Canada's perspective, their view on Israel's war with Hamas.
How could this then investigation impact Canada's diplomatic relationship with Israel? Not only the diplomatic relationship with Israel, but also Canada's own Jewish Israeli communities that live right there in the country.
So I love how the anchor has to jump in and try to stop this by saying, well, what about, if this investigation keeps going, the diplomatic relation between Canada and Israel, and what about all the Jewish groups that are here? And I find it kind of a bit hysterical. I kind of find it ironic. And I should have mentioned this when we covered about the Bill C-9, when they are saying they're trying to crack down on the rise of anti-Semitism. Isn't it ironic that this is coming from the nation that not only applauded for a legit war criminal Nazi in Parliament twice in front of the entire nation, has a monument resurrected in Oakville, Ontario, for all the Nazi criminals that partaked in killing Jewish and Polish citizens. Not only that, but Canada itself has had decades and decades of harboring these Nazis from World War II that took apart in outrageous, just diabolical, catastrophic damage to Jewish people. And they harbored people into Canada. They granted them citizenship. And now all of a sudden we care so much about anti-Semitism. Isn't that kind of interesting? Isn't it kind of interesting that all of a sudden now we're worried about, rise of anti-Semitism and the safety of Jewish people. Now, after all the years that they have counteracted against Jewish people in Canada, there was a lot of Jewish groups that were compelling the Canadian government to release the documents of all the war criminals that they brought into the country. And a Ukrainian lobby immediately tried to stop that. They blocked it immediately because they didn't want Ukraine exposed. And the Canadian government, at a time when they're trying to say, oh, we're going to stop anti-Semitism, we're trying to stop, hatred of Jewish faith and beliefs, and we're trying to do, they're spending money and facilitating the war in Ukraine, which is going to neo-Nazis, confirmed neo-Nazis. They're out loud and proud of it. So, just absolute hysteria, just absolutely hysterical to see the irony of all this. Like, all of a sudden now, oh, what about the Jewish groups in Canada? Yeah, what about the Jewish groups that tried to open up transparency on the fact that Canada brought in a bunch of Nazis post-World War II that are living among us? You applauded one of them twice in Parliament. They wanted exposure of that, and they were immediately dismissed. They were immediately blocked by a Ukrainian lobby group that wants these Nazis to roam free. They want a bunch of neo-Nazis because that works in favor of their agenda. They don't ever talk about that, but they'll talk about this, the rise of anti-Semitism, all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I don't know if the relationship, the diplomatic stance, the diplomatic posture that Canada has had since October 7th could get much worse when it comes to Israel. You'll recall that along with France and the United Kingdom, Canada released a joint statement not long ago, just last month, where the first line in the statement is, we strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military operations in Gaza. I mean,
so this is when everyone started to freak out. Everyone started to freak out. You could see all the accounts on X and whatnot starting to, be like, oh, you're rewarding terrorism by acknowledging a Palestinian state. As I stated before, yes, they recognize a Palestinian state. Okay, that's kind of good. At least they can recognize that Palestinians do exist, that there are Gazans, that there are people within this territory that are not Israeli, that there are other people in this situation. Yeah, they recognize it, but they're not actually compelled to do anything about it. Because at a time when they're recognizing the Palestinian state, they also turned their back around and gave Israel a bunch of military equipment. And we've exposed this. They gave millions and millions of dollars in military assistance to the IDF, to Israel, to fully execute the genocide in Gaza. So it's a complete hypocritical double standard. Oh, you're recognizing Palestine, but here's a bunch of military equipment to a rogue force that wants to completely wipe out Palestine. Do you see how ridiculous all this is? Do you see the utter ridiculous irony that comes about this? And everyone's, so frantic about recognizing Palestine. You're rewarding terrorism. You're rewarding terrorism. You mean the same terrorist groups that we've been funding for the last 40 years, 50 years? Since 1953, when we overthrew Iran and installed a dictator because we didn't want Iran, we didn't want the Middle East to flourish on their own, and we wanted to hijack their resources. Kind of around that time. No one ever talks about that.
Israel's fighting what I consider to be a war of survival, a war against a genocidal death cult. And so right there, it doesn't get much more clearer than that. I mean, this is a government that has strongly opposed Israel's actions in such a way that you would never see applied to any other allied country.
Well, we have seen a sharp rise in anti-Israeli sentiment in Canada recently. In fact, the Israeli government recently issued a travel warning to Israelis who are traveling to Canada. What does this now new move then say about the general Canadian sentiment, whether it's spewing from the actual citizens themselves or stemming from the Canadian government?
Well, look, this feels like the government is now potentially treating Canadian citizens who went and volunteered with an allied country at war against a mutually shared enemy and enemies, treating them like they're foreign fighters going to fight in Syria or Iraq with ISIS. I mean, this is...
Yeah, because that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. You gave up being a Canadian citizen to go and assist and aid in a foreign country's army. You're clearly choosing another country over your own country. That's the point. That's the principle I'm making. I don't care that they're serving Israel. I don't care if it's an allied nation. I don't care if they're serving the army of freaking France. If you're serving another country ahead of your own and you still want to come back and grant yourself as a Canadian, you did nothing wrong, even though you're assisting a country that may be complicit of war crimes, that may be a conflict of interest, doesn't matter to me. You are part of that. You are no longer respected as a Canadian citizen. That is by a principle. And I would say the same thing if someone was serving the Syrian army. I would say the same thing if they were serving the Taiwan, if they were serving Ukraine. Oh, but they're allied nations and they're part of... I don't care. They're a foreign country. They're a foreign country. You are a Canadian citizen serving a foreign country. There's many conflicts of interest of that involving national security. You could be tried with treason. You could be tried with being a traitor. Doesn't matter to me. It does not matter to me. On a principle level, this should be investigated. But of course, the RCMP is trying to cover this up. The RCMP is trying to backtrack this because they're getting pressure from the Israeli government. They're getting pressure by these Jewish groups. They're getting pressure by the billionaire escapade to stop this investigation. But there are some people that are actually willing to call this out. So the Maple in particular, and shout out to the Maple for actually exposing a lot of this information because you don't see this a lot in Canadian media. As I said, if you want to learn what's actually happening over in Israel and Gaza, go right to the source. Go right to Israeli media because they're out loud and proud of the horrific stuff that they're doing. So the Maple dug this up and says, these 49 Canadians have served in Israel's military since October 7th. The Maple has identified 49 Canadians who have served in the Israeli military since October 7th of 2023. And the article goes on to say, Find IDF Soldiers is a database that lists Canadians who have served in the Israeli military at any point in their lives. The database now contains the names and profiles of 206 Canadians, making it by far the most comprehensive public project of its sort in Canada. So, and people are jumping to this. People are aggravated on this to say that, oh, we're doxing them. They're saying that, oh, they're being doxed. They're exposing all this information. Again, if this was Canadians serving in Afghanistan, would we not be doing the same thing? And you'd be cheering for that. You'd be cheering for that. Or if they were serving Syria, or if they're serving Yemen. But no, because they were serving Israel and they were serving the IDF, everybody's going frantic of saying, oh my God, how dare you dox these people? How dare you dox these people? Again, the same country that wants to build digital IDs that's going to dox everybody. Everybody's going to be out and exposed. But no. My God. We can't expose these possible war criminals. After analyzing the most recent data, I discovered that at least 24% of the 49 people in the database have been identified in the Israeli military since October 7, 2023. This is likely an undercount. Ooh, pardon my French. However, because one, it's possible some of those on the list have not made a potential return to the Israeli military public. Two, if they had made it public, then they have done so after I create a profile for them, meaning I would have missed it in any of my research, so the author's research. And three, if they have made it public, I may have not been able to find it in general. I also know that the database as a whole contains just a fraction of the actual number of Canadians who have served in the Israeli military. Regardless, this article highlights those who have served in the Israeli military since October 7, 2023, given the particular intense scrutiny it has received during this period for its actions in Gaza. Not all of these soldiers may have served in Gaza. The Maple is not accusing of any of them having committed any sort of crime. It is legal for Canadian citizens to join the Israeli military. Please note that these profiles were originally published between November 2024 and October 2025 and are republished here without updates. As such, some details such as age and job may be outdated. So here's the list of names here. I'm not going to go through all of them. We'll list the article below for people to see, but you can see all these people. And I just find it very, again, particular that, you know, if it was any other country, this would be such a conflict of interest. But it's okay to serve the Israeli military that are committing war crimes, that are continuing a genocide, that are wiping out an entire nation, that have are being prosecuted by the by the international courts if they actually respond to the international courts. So, by principle, this should not be allowed. By principle. So I don't understand why there's this kind of cookie cutter out of making this legal for Israel. You could serve Israel's army, but if a Canadian said they wanted to serve, say, the Russian army, I'm sure they would get scrutinized 9 ways a Sunday. They'd be doxxed. They'd be, the RCMP would be arresting them. They'd be held to trial. They'll have to confess in front of parliament. Like, all this crazy stuff. Imagine if it was any other country, but it's okay if it's Israel. It's okay if it's Israel. But everyone's jumping on the, oh my God, if they get investigated, they might be doxxed. They might, da, 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 da. It's just so interesting about that. So there's more. You see it there. Going on and on and on and on. Da 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 da. So like I said, we'll link it down below for people to read on, because I'm not going to go through all of this. But of course, the troll accounts. when started to attack this. So Gil Jacobi, who claims to be a 23-year-old MIT graduate who basically does nothing but spams the internet with troll accounts like this. He says dual Israeli-Canadian citizens who served in the IDF are now being under investigation by the Canadian police for taking part in the war in Gaza. There is no longer any confusion. Canada has been taken over by Islamists. Really? So consideration of national security, consideration of being a traitor, of treason, of felony charges, that's considered Islamist by this guy? Again, what if it was a Russian Canadian, a dual Russian Canadian citizen serving the Russian army to go after Ukraine? Are you gonna say that for that? Are you gonna have the same tone and judgment for that? No, you'd probably freak out and go, "Oh my God, why would a Canadian go and serve the Russian army?" Arr! But it's not because it's your group, because it's the IDF. Oh, now a problem has occurred because they're being investigated. Oh, we're trying to expose that. So now it's a problem. Now it's a problem. Just kind of hilarious. Here's Yves Ungler, who's running for the NDP leadership race. He's a author and a great Canadian. Says dozens of Canadians are part of the force killing Palestinian children. Many of them have been induced into an IOF in violation of Foreign Enlistment Act, but RCMP won't act. So they're trying to hold them an investigation, but the RCMP is not budging. The RCMP is not budging, even though under the Canadian law, under Foreign Enlistment Act, they would be tried for an investigation. And here's just to bring this up. This is from the Government of Canada website. This is part of the act here. Any person who, being a Canadian national within or outside Canada, voluntarily accepts or agrees to accept any commission or engagement in the armed forces of any foreign state, at war with any friendly foreign state, or whether a Canadian national or not within Canada includes any person in to accept or agree to accept any commission or engagement in any such armed forces is guilty of an offense. So they would be investigated under that act. But the RCMP is refusing to falter on this investigation. Isn't that interesting? The RCMP is refusing to follow through on this investigation. It sounds like they're getting some words from above to not follow through on law and order. Isn't that kind of interesting? So here's the commissioner. This is Mike Duham. Refused to answer if RCMP will investigate Canadian involvement in war crimes. So he was asked this by Yves Ungler, and here's him getting out of his vehicle. Completely ignores the question. Take a look.
Does RCMP want to investigate Canadians that are fighting in the Israeli military? Does the Foreign Enlistment Act that Canadians aren't supposed to induce? Mr. RCMP Commissioner, do you answer a question about the Foreign Enlistment Act and Canadians fighting in the Israeli military? Does RCMP?
Nothing. No acknowledgement of even the person asking the question. I'm assuming it's Yves Ungler. I'm assuming that was him recording himself. No acknowledgement whatsoever. But that is part of the Foreign Enlistment Act, that if a Canadian is serving in any foreign nation's army and any armed forces that are outside of Canada should be subjugated to questioning, should be subjugated to a concern, be subjugated to an investigation, which is exactly the point that I've stated. That it doesn't matter, regardless of what country you're serving. If you're a Canadian citizen that's going out of their way to serve another country ahead of Canada, that is cause for concerns. That is cause for you voluntarily giving up your citizenship giving up your privileges to be a Canadian in this country and serving the needs of another country. That if you want to serve Israel, then good luck in Israel. If you want to serve Ukraine, good luck in Ukraine. That's your choice. That's your decision. But I'm saying that by law, by the criminal code, by the national security, that there would be investigation. There should be investigation. That you are not exempt just because you're serving a diplomatic country like Israel. Which I say that loosely, obviously. So here's this guy, Kirch. He says the Canadian government is doing more to stop Kneecap from playing in Canada. That's the Irish band, the Irish DJ that criticizes the IDF, that goes after, the billionaire class that supports Israel. The Canadian government is trying to restrict them from playing in Canada. Then they are prosecuting Canadians enlisted in the IDF committing genocide. So it goes to show you the priorities of this. It goes to show you that it's okay to commit war crimes. It's okay to, do heinous acts. It's okay to mass murder people. As long as it's in favor of us, as long as it's in favor of the establishment, you're allowed to be a psychotic terrorist. But if you're on the other side, if you're doing something against the Western hegemony, if you're doing something against the empire, if you're doing something against our imperialistic powers around the world, then that's for cause of concern. Because let me just remind people that these are Canadians that have killed Palestinians. These are Canadians that are deliberately going out of their way to commit a genocide. And meanwhile, this is the same Canadian government that called the Freedom Convoy a peaceful demonstration a bunch of terrorists. Just to point that out. So here's Ben Mulroney, who, between him and Justin Trudeau, it's like the game of who's the oldest Nepo baby. Sons of former prime ministers, they grew up with a silver spoon, they got everything handed to them on a silver plate. And here's Ben Mulroney on his podcast show that I don't know if anyone listens to. He's just, he's just one of those guys. He's one of those people that lives in his own bubble. He doesn't know what's going on in regular society because he doesn't partake with regular society. I'm sure he gets it up and up with certain friends and family and dignitary of his fathers and so on. So Ben Mulroney had some comments after Mark Carney made the statement about the Palestinian existence. And I haven't shown much of Ben Mulroney because, frankly, I couldn't give a damn about him. Like, he's just such a prude. He's such a narcissistic person himself that I couldn't care to give him any exposure. But I found this interesting. So Ben Mulroney says, after declaring Palestine a state, Mark Carney spoke about his decision and future plans, but troops on the ground. Nobody told us about that. So this is a guy, again, who's very much on the side of, pro-Israel, pro-Zionist. This is Ben Mulroney we're talking about, who freaked out about Mark Carney announcing the recognition of a Palestinian state, but isn't freaked out by the fact that Canadians are deliberately going overseas to commit war crimes against children, against innocent mothers, and killing off an entire population of civilians, assisting in that. He's not concerned about that. He's not concerned that Canadians are deliberately going to a foreign country to serve their military. That's not a conflict of interest. That's not a national security threat to someone like Ben Mulroney because it's the good guys. Oh, you're helping the good guys, so that's a good thing. I'm sure he'd say the same thing about Canadians going off to Ukraine. Well, you're serving the good guys, so that's fine. No, it's still a conflict of interest. But here's Ben Mulroney talking about this. Even just the look of him is just so dorky. Like, come on.
Let's listen to Mark Carney, because he sat down and he gave a sort of fairly fulsome explanation as to why Canada was doing what it was doing. So let's listen.
We're not doing that. We're under no illusions that this is any sort of panacea. But it's necessary in our judgment. It's and the judgment of most other countries in the world, that we have to push on this now because, as I say, the possibility, in absolute violation of the UN Charter and in absolute violation of international law, of self-determination for the Palestinian peoples is being erased. So we're doing what we can, but recognizing the limitations.
But again, you're not actually following through on any action to commit to that promise. You're saying that, okay, they're violating human rights of Palestinians. That's awful. That's disgusting. We have reported this numerous times over and over. They're still doing it right now. Even after this supposed ceasefire, they're still continuing on. They're not holding Israel to contempt. They're complicit of it. Mark Carney is allowing for more military aid, more military assistance under our nose to be given to these people. So this whole idea of recognizing Palestine is an utter joke. That's what I've said. It's an utter joke. It's theatrics. They actually don't give a damn. Mark Carney himself even said that the only way we can recognize a Palestinian state is if it's full of Zionists, meaning that Palestine would not exist. There'd be no point to Palestine under Mark Carney, under Keir Starmer, under Emmanuel Macron. All of it's just theatrics because none of them give a damn. None of them care about it. They all serve this kind of glorified master of individuals that are perpetuating the colonization of Palestine and for the greater Israeli project. They're serving the Zionist class. They're serving the psychopaths. So all these people...
Yes, I'm still here, Hollywood. Just ahead on today's episode.
So all these people that are
so
freaking out
he was very nervous about being an
Palestine being
Jonathan
recognized as a state.
I scream a
It's
lot.
absolutely hysterical.
I don't know why.
It's absolutely hysterical because they're not seeing the hypocrisy of all this. That they're still continuing on the genocide. It's not going to stop unless you actually take action and restrict the military assistance to serve Palestine or to serve Israel in committing an atrocity against Palestine. So here's the Toronto Star just reminding us, this is from just yesterday, Israel's still firing at Lebanon. So it's not stopping. It's not stopping. There's supposed to be a ceasefire. There's supposed to be stopping. All these people on X and social media giving themselves pats on the back to say the war is over. The war is not over. The war was never over. You got duped. You got duped. Oh, well, they got back the hostages, so everything's back to normal. No, of course it's not. Because the whole intention was never about October 7th. It was never about hostages. It was never about this. This has been going on since the formation of the said state of Israel. This is a attack on the Palestinian region so they can occupy, control, and take over that nation and take over parts of Lebanon, take over parts of Syria, take over parts of go after Iran, go into Jordan, go into Egypt, and it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop until you actually cut them off from the source. Do not give them resources. Do not give them financial assistance. That is how you stop these wars. Just like how you stop Ukraine when you stop giving them money. Stop allowing and allocating our tax dollars to be used for atrocities. That's as simple as it gets, folks. But they're refusing to do that. And maybe it's because of this kind of mentality. So, suppressed news states that this pastor, this guy John Hagee, at Christians United for Israel conference, Jewish people in Israel are a chosen people. Remember, they keep telling you that they're a chosen people, but they're also the victim. But they're also under attack. They're also the victim, but they're the chosen people. They're strong. Again, it's such hypocrisy for all this. Who are all above all the people on the face of the earth. That includes the United States of America. That's what this pastor is telling people. Now, mind you, it's been a long while since I have stepped foot in a church and listened to a sermon. But my understanding is that we're all God's children. We're all created in an image of, Jesus Christ and the Lord and Savior and whatnot. That was my understanding back in the day. So how did that go from that to chosen people, that only certain groups are way above the law? They're way above societal norms than anybody else. And that anyone else outside of this group, outside of this cult, is considered evil, is considered worse, is considered less than dirt. And that's the mentality that's attached to this. So listen to what this pastor is preaching to this audience in the most psychotic way.
The Bible proves that the Jewish people are the most unique people on the face of the earth. They are a chosen people. They are a covenant people. They are a cherished people. They are the apple of God's eye. The unchallengeable fact of the Bible is that Israel and the Jewish people are unique. Listen, Israel did not choose this uniqueness. God chose it for them. Listen to David's prayer in 1 Chronicles 17:20. It's one of the most powerful words in the Scripture. O Lord, there is none like you, nor is there any God beside you. And who is like your people Israel? Listen, the one nation on the earth whom God went to redeem for himself as a people. Chosen and still cherished.
So you're allowed to get away with it because, hey, the Invisible Man grants me that. Think of how crazy that is. Think of how crazy that is. Think of that was if that was a brown guy. Think of that if that was someone from Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or Libya or any of these so-called terrorist nations. Right now, the president of Syria that we overthrow and granted the position to is the former leader of Al-Qaeda. The people that are representing the Israeli government are psychotic villains. They're worse than than comic book villains you can imagine. And they're using this excuse of, well, in some sort of scripture reading, that they're the chosen people. They're able to get away with it. But anyone that goes into this, and I may not be the expert to chime in on this, but I've seen people, talk about theology and go into, Christianity and the origins of it, that under the very origins of where Israel came from, it's the descendants of Abraham, and the descendants of Abraham include Palestinians, includes the Arabs. So committing this atrocity against Palestine is actually very anti-Semitic because by definition, by the holy book itself, by the origins of Christianity and Judaism, they are Semites. They are Semites. But they don't care. These are people that are psychotically, insanely possessed by this mentality. And Canadians are lining up to support this regime, to support that. And as I stated before, doesn't matter if it's Israel, Ukraine, France, the UK, if they're serving the Chinese army, they're serving the North Korean army. I don't care what country. You are serving a foreign nation ahead of your own. That is cause for concern. That is cause for concern. That is cause for liability. You are held accountable to that country if they commit a felony, if they commit a war crime. You are part of that. You are complicit of that. You are not going to get saving grace by stating you're a Canadian. You had nothing a part of this because you deliberately chose to put a foreign nation ahead of your own. And that, to me, is a violation under the Foreign Enlistment Act and also voluntarily giving up your citizenship. That by principle, that should be the case. Because everyone would agree if this is a Canadian serving the Syrian military, but since it's Israel, since it's the so-called greatest ally, we're just going to grant them the exemption of holding them accountable. It's absolutely crazy, absolutely hysterical, absolutely just shows the utter irony and the utter bullshittery that people are doing to cover up the insanity that comes out of this, that drives out of the, colonization of Israel, the Greater Israeli Project, the Zionist death cult, and how they're just able to get away with it by tricking, by deceiving people, by blackmailing, by subjugating people, by, villainizing people. It's just absolutely just diabolically crazy.